Namaste, everyone. Namaste, shalom, peace, and blessings to all of you. Welcome to our July 2026 baithak. I'm Sunita Vishwanath, co-founder of Hindus for Human Rights, and our topic today is sacred resistance, an interfaith dialogue on protest as public theology. Our guests today are Reverend Mark Thompson, who is running a little bit late, but he will be here soon, and Rabbi Margot Meitner, who is here with us already. Reverend Mark Thompson is a seasoned broadcaster and civil rights organizer rooted in the Black church tradition. Reverend Mark hosts Make It Plain podcast and has spent 4 decades at the forefront of racial justice movements. Rabbi Margot Meitner is a psychotherapist, a community rabbi, and a leading member of Rabbis for Ceasefire. Rabbi Margot integrates Jewish spiritual care with clinical mental health expertise to advance trauma healing and social action. In this baithak, we're going to discuss protest as a form of public theology in our contemporary moment. Grounding ourselves in Black prophetic and Jewish, and of course, Hindu traditions of moral courage and nonviolent activist action, this discussion will explore how protest is a deeply spiritual act. Many of us have been following the incredible cockroach youth uprising taking place in India right now, in which India's youth has faced severe brutality at the hands of the Delhi police and police around the country who are following the orders of the Indian government. And still, they have won all their demands, at the moment at least, for education reform through disciplined satyagraha, nonviolent resistance. In our conversation today, we will look at the urgent crises of our contemporary moment, from, of course, what is happening in India, but the genocide in Gaza, and of course, very relevant to us in the United States, the ICE raids across America. And we will explore the question of how putting our bodies on the line turns street corners into places of sacred purpose. And so, you'll all be part of the conversation towards the end after our presenters have spoken to us. We'll be confronting the personal costs of resisting injustice, and we'll be learning how to build lasting hope together. We're going to explore what it means to carry forward the lineages of Satyagraha, the civil rights movement, and Jewish prophetic witness. So before we start, I want to give a big shout out to Mayank Dev Kumar for helping us to organize our baithak series overall, and this one in particular, and for being on hand today to help us through with staying on time, with tech, and Mayank will also facilitate our Q&A at the end, and will close us out. So let's dive right in. When we look at the world right now, from the ongoing genocide in Gaza to the state-sanctioned ICE raids terrorizing immigrant communities across the United States, to the violent crackdowns on student dissent in India, we are forced to ask a fundamental question: where does our faith demand that we stand? I was one of the 600 or more faith leaders who converged in Minneapolis after the murder by ICE of Renee Good. Rabbi Margot, one of our guests, was also there. I flew back home on January 24th morning, and by the time I landed in New York City, Alex Preddy had been murdered as well. In a piece for Religion News Service that day, I wrote about the theology of showing up. As a Hindu, my aunt taught me that a pilgrimage, a yatra, is defined by hardship. You walk barefoot on ice to access a shrine, or you perform pradakshina by rolling on the ground. When we put our bodies on the line, when we face tear gas or risk arrest, we aren't just engaging in a political act or a tactic. We are turning street corners into houses of worship. We are practicing satyagraha, holding firm to truth and praying with our feet. So I want to speak with Rabbi Margot first. Rabbi Margot, let's talk about what it means to physically show up when state power or institutional violence tries to make a place unsafe. I want to bring your unique perspective as a psychotherapist and a social worker into this. You've written that individual healing and collective liberation are completely interdependent. When we were together in Minneapolis, standing at federal buildings and watching community members patrol streets during ICE raids, the collective trauma was palpable. When we show up to places of intense crisis, how does public theology function as a form of communal care and spiritual grounding? How do we hold space for somatic trauma while putting our bodies on the line? Rabbi Margot, the floor is yours. Rabbi Margot, you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sunita. I'm really humbled to be here today with you and with soon to be Reverend Mark, um, and um, and excited to dive into this topic that's so close to my heart. Um, I really appreciate this last question, and I'm going to dive in more deeply with sharing the experience of the Yom Kippur Yisker ritual, and describing that, because that I feel like is a very good example of what we're talking about when we're turning um, ritual into public theology and really putting our bodies on the line. But your question makes me think of just like really getting to what we're doing with our bodies. And being there for other people, and the power of showing up, as you wrote so beautifully about in your piece from the Minneapolis convening. I think about going to Minneapolis in January after Renee Good was murdered, and there was a call from um, I literally got a call from a dear colleague and friend, Rabbi Ariel Lakach Rosenberg, who's sort of at the center of a lot of the interfaith organizing. And she was just like, "Can you come?" And really, they didn't know what even they needed us for exactly, but there was a call for clergy to come, and they were hoping maybe for 100, and I think over 600 showed up. Um, and when we got there, the people of Minneapolis who hosted us, the fellow organizers, activists, were really in a war zone. They were shell shocked. And honestly, I feel like we were there to lend our nervous systems, to lend our regulated nervous systems to the people of Minneapolis. They needed our, like, they needed us to stand there and witness them, to provide sacred witness, to be able to come in from the outside um, and reflect back how not normal and how not okay what was happening was, because they were like what they were already accustomed to was so kind of out of the realm of normalcy, like carrying around gas masks with them, and doing neighborhood patrol, like not going to their work jobs because they were doing neighborhood patrol. um, and um, I think about how we were asked by one reverend. I don't know if you were there for this part, Sunita, when the reverend of a Latinx church in a very impacted area asked us to walk around the block and sing.
Wow.
Um, and this was because many of the residents were literally in hiding and couldn't come out of their homes. And just to be able to hear our voices and know that we were there and with them and really affirming their humanity and that they mattered, but also lending our voices to as a way of both calming ourselves, walking through this war zone, and also sort of emitting that out to the people that we were trying to hear, have hear our voices. So, um, would this be a good time to share about the Yom Kippur
Yes,
Yisker ritual? Okay.
yes. Um, yeah, when we were in Minneapolis together, I remember so many. I was with the Rabbis for Ceasefire group, and many of us were using the word occupation because it immediately harkened back to the issue that group is galvanized around, the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. Um, and while I wasn't with you in that particular singing experience, there was a lot of what we were doing when we were in Minneapolis. The group of Rabbis for Ceasefire that I was with was walking through neighborhoods and singing. And some of the songs were the same ones that we sang on the peace delegation to the West Bank in 2024. And so the interconnections of the struggles in different parts of the world, they just look the same when you're facing the might of state power. um, and yeah, it was so powerful to be there with you all. Yeah, and I was also with you on Yom Kippur 2 Yom Kippurs ago, and that was another very, very powerful moment for me, and I'm so grateful to be able to be in this with you all. That particular Yom Kippur coincided with Vijayadashami, a very important day for Hindus. And so you all were in white, so I was also in a white sari that day as we got arrested. So please tell us about that very powerful Yom Kippur action.
Yeah. So I'm just going to share screen. Oops. Hold on. Okay. Can can you all see that? Great. So I want to tell you about this ritual action Rabbis for Ceasefire held this past Yom Kippur in New York City. Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement, the holiest day of the Jewish year. And I want to tell you about it because I think it was a powerful manifestation of what we're talking about. It was a manifestation and embodiment of what we're talking about when we talk about liberatory Judaism. It also happened to be one of the most profound spiritual experiences of my life. Yisker is a memorial prayer service done on 4 holidays during the year. This was the second year Rabbis for Ceasefire decided to hold a mass public Yisker service on Yom Kippur. And the idea came out of a need and desire to hold public communal space for grieving and remembering all the lives lost on and after October 7th. And to do something really rooted in Jewish tradition for the folks who could not bear to enter a synagogue for all the many reasons that might be. For so many people, including myself, it felt like we couldn't do Yom Kippur as usual. How could we be in the safe confines of our sanctuaries on this day of repentance in the face of a genocide being done in our name? We needed to be in the streets putting our bodies on the line. There was a rabbi colleague who came and shared that he was questioning whether he even wanted to be Jewish anymore, and that all he could do was show up that day to bring his body, if not his spirit. And to make it accessible to as many people as possible, we held it outside at Brooklyn, at in Brooklyn at Borough
Brooklyn
Hall
Borough.
Plaza. Yes. And we live streamed it to folks all over the world. And there are recordings of many of our ritual actions that we've done on the Rabbis for Ceasefire website that you can watch after the fact. We had over 1,500 people there in person, and the service included traditional prayers as well as newly written liturgy. And there was singing and politicians speaking, including Brad Lander, the former New York City comptroller, now nominee for Congress, who essentially preached a sermon where he used the word genocide to describe what's happening in Gaza for the first time in public. And we had Palestinian writer Hala Al-Yan, who spoke beautifully. And we adapted mourning rituals, including asking folks to bring stones to leave behind, as you do in Jewish tradition when you visit a grave. And what we're doing in this photo is a collective kriya, which is the tearing of clothing or fabric when in a state of mourning. And it's usually an individual or personal expression of grief that we made communal by having long spools of white fabric unfurled. You can see woven across the rows of people, connecting people to one another in their grief, so that our tugs, our tears could be felt by one another. So it was this beautiful visual sight and also a powerful embodied experience. And those elements of creativity and embodiment and interconnectedness are so integral to an experience of liberatory religious practice. And at some point in the service, I noticed a couple of people pointing up to the sky, and my body tensed, assuming danger. And I looked up to see a rainbow above us, with nothing in the weather or sky that would otherwise explain the presence of a rainbow. It was truly magic. You can see it above in this picture. And in the Torah, the Hebrew Bible, the rainbow is a sign of the covenant. It's a reminder of the pact God made with humanity after the great flood. And if God promised never again to reap total destruction on us, we have to promise to not reap total destruction on one another. And that rainbow stayed above us for the entire service. And it was like, oh, wow, we've created a holy dwelling place for God's presence. I want to share one reflection from someone who was there, who shared that Yom Kippur always evokes this memory of him holding a bunch of prayer books, a memory of him looking up at his father on their way to synagogue, his father holding a bunch of prayer books, and that he had this feeling of tremendous loss this year going into the high holidays. He said, I won't get to hold my child's hand and lead them into that house of cards, that artifice or construct of Jewishness that can't be anymore. But being at that ritual action, he said, I felt like we were creating something new. We were using our bodies to construct a new holy temple or a sukkot shalomecha, a protective dwelling place for each other. We were physically making and entering a new space, which gave me hope that there will be a Jewish community for me to inhabit and for me to hold a little one's hand and guide them into. After the Yizkor service, we took our ritual to the streets and continued on through the Yom Kippur liturgy, performing the Avodah service, which is this dramatic reenactment of the ancient high priest's rituals of confession and purification in the Holy Temple, and includes a series of 3 full body prostrations on the ground, which we did in the streets of Brooklyn. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel talked about praying with our feet, marching and protest as prayer, not like prayer, but prayer itself. Liberatory Judaism expands what it means to pray. It's not just going to synagogue and reciting the words in our prayer books. Prayer is an expression of longing and hope, as is protest. When I put my tallis, my prayer shawl on for a protest, it's not just for show. I understand myself to be entering into a holy expression of my deepest values and longing for the kind of world that I want to live in. I want to take a moment just to point out some folks on the sidelines here in the yellow vests. You can see them surrounding us and the medics here. These folks created a net of safety and care and held us that was integral to allowing us to do what we did. And they stood around us, protecting us. They handed out water and blankets. And this is to say it's not all grandiose and spiritual. There are so many logistical details to hold. And what is central to any liberatory project is the ability to create these systems of care and safety for ourselves that are not reliant on a carceral state. And having been in Minneapolis, witnessing how they've been doing this really made me understand the importance of this. Eventually, 9 of us rabbis locked ourselves together and blocked the on-ramp to the Brooklyn Bridge. There we were. We didn't know how long we'd be able to hold the streets for before being arrested, but it was a nice day. The cops were enjoying our singing, and we were there for a few hours and made it all the way to Ne'ilah, the final Yom Kippur service, which literally means locking, because it's said that the holy gates are closing and will be locked, and it's our last chance to get in our final atonements. So in this moment of like, what are you standing up for? And 2, we're there locked to one another facing the cops. And another rabbi shared with me that he never truly understood Ne'ilah until then. And you see in this photo here, I'm looking up to on the right, I'm looking up to the sky as I'm about to get loaded onto the paddy wagon. And I was looking up to see if there were 3 stars in the sky, which marks the end of Yom Kippur. And in my view was this giant bronze sculpture of an arm pointing up to the sky that I hadn't noticed. And at that moment, someone blew the shofar, the ram's horn, for us that ends the holiday. And we chanted the final Shema, which is the central declaration of faith in Judaism that affirms our commitment to recognize the divine connection of all things and respond to that truth with total love and action. And later, when I Googled what that sculpture was, I learned that it was called Unity. What we did that Yom Kippur was create a ritual space very much outside existent Jewish structures in which to claim and insist that our religious traditions and practices not be used as justification for oppression and destruction, but rather be a source of practicing solidarity, for living into the oneness and interconnectedness of all life that we proclaim in the Shema. our holiest of prayers. So I'll stop there and
Thank you so
excited.
much.
Yeah.
I have tingles in my spine. This is your what you're talking about is what I so yearn for in my liberatory Hindu community. And those of you who are listening, I, I I hope that together we can reimagine some of our traditions and rituals and pujas to come together and do the kind of prayer, embodied liberatory prayer that Rabbis for Ceasefire and so many other groups are doing. Um, right at the place, the specific place where humanity meets, the oppressive force. Just to put ourselves right there. Gandhiji, Mahatma Gandhi, towards the end of his life, um, said to somebody, and he called it a talisman. And I'm paraphrasing, but basically what he said to this person who was in doubt, he said, well, what this step that you are considering taking, ask yourself, does that step actually help the person in the world who is suffering the most, who is unheard, who is disinherited? Does this step help them? And if you find that it does, then do it. And then you will find yourself melt away in that action. And I feel when I come to when I'm with either of you, Reverend Mark, Rabbi Margot, Rabbis for Ceasefire, um, myself melts away, and I am united. I mean, it's amazing that was unity. I'm united with you in the most profound way. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel also said, prayer is meaningless unless it is subversive, unless it seeks to overthrow and to ruin the pyramids of callousness, hatred, opportunism, and falsehoods. It's we don't have to look far for the teachings that we need, and they're in all of our traditions and in all of our legacies. We just need to connect our legacy to them and move forward together. And so I'm so happy Reverend Mark is here. Thank you for being here. Rabbi Margot, I'll come back to you, but Reverend Mark, welcome. You and I stood together during the Interfaith vigils at the Columbia University student encampment, praying with and praying over students as they put their futures on the line. But your activism began on campus when you helped lead the 1985 Georgetown shantytown protest against South African apartheid. When you look at the student encampments for Gaza, that happened across the United States? What continuity did you see with the anti-apartheid struggles of the 1980s? And what do you think is the theological function of clergy showing up on campus grounds to stand with students? Let's start there, Reverend Mark.
Well, first of all, can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. Good to be with you all. Good to be with everyone. Honored to be here. Um, Rabbi Margot, I'm not sure how many demonstrations there were on the Brooklyn Bridge, but I know I was at one of them with all of you. Uh, I just can't remember um, which one. I've been in so many civil disobedience actions. It's um, it's hard to um, keep up with. Um, but and thank you, Sunita, for inviting me, and thank you for participating in what we did with the students at Columbia. That was a strong example of ecumenical faith, and we wanted that because there was a diverse array of students from different faith backgrounds. And so, what I've noticed over the years, and what my experience has been, is that just about all student movements, and even if we look back at the ones before our time, have certain commonalities and similarities. Um, and that's a good thing because they're organic and pure and idealistic and unencumbered by a lot of external politics. To put it more simply, um, when we're young, we have less fear. When we're older, we become more jaded by all the different things and all the different consequences to consider. But when we're younger, we just go for the issue that's important. And that's certainly what the students at Columbia did, and very proud of them because of that. But we know immediately thereafter, there was a retaliation and the assaults on the part of the Trump administration and others. Um, and that pretty much quelled what was going on. People were literally being arrested for their beliefs and for their support. Even students who were Jewish were being harassed. And then, as we also know, and I think we have to acknowledge, um, there are those who actually are anti-Semitic, who have elevated to an art form over the past 40 and 50 years of projecting anti-Semitism onto others and weaponizing it as well. And so what Rabbi Margot and others in the Jewish faith have done is confront that. And that has not won them a lot of friends. The narrative is broken from the past in terms of what's happening today. It's a good thing. We're taking some hits because of it, but there's an evolution in terms of people's awareness when it comes to issues like foreign policy, specifically and very clearly, people beginning to question, even average people who are not as theological as we are, asking, well, is what the state of Israel does, is what Netanyahu does emblematic of my faith as a Jew? Or is that state politics that has nothing to do with faith in humankind? And I think that's a very timely question at this moment. The good thing about that question, it's short-circuited the Trumps and the Netanyahus of the world, and they don't quite know what to do
Many
with
more
it.
these right now are on back foot.
That's right. That's right. And so the young people in every movement, in every generation, in every cycle of action always serve as an inspiration to us all. Um, so I think what happened at Columbia was monumental. And again, some hits were taken. Um, uh, Politics got involved. I was directly involved in the last minute negotiations that ended up falling apart or being overruled by the police to raid and make arrests. And that was unfortunate. I had hoped that the movement would have been uh, reinvigorated in the fall of 25. Um, but it was not, because we know the fear, the intimidation, the harassment, and the backlash. And some folk were just kicked out of school. Faculty lost their jobs. And so it's very interesting that um, international politics or one nation's foreign policy can dictate our freedom of speech in this country. But that's why this dialogue is important. We
Reverend
need,
Mark, oh,
yes.
so go ahead. No,
No, I was
continue.
just going to say, I was going to, and I'll close. What we need is more uh, ecumenical actions like this, more coming together to see some of the similarities between our faiths and what they mean for public theology.
Reverend Mark, I had asked if you could see vital connections between what was happening at Columbia and your experience in South Africa um, decades earlier, and also in India right now, the student uprising has had a victory,
Good.
and the government has agreed to their three demands. And the protest, the main protest that was happening in Delhi, has for the moment, it's ceased right now. And it's a moment like that one at Columbia. It's much bigger because it's an entire country, of course, but all of our hopes are with the students that their movement is sustained and grows. And so, over your lifespan of being involved in student activism and then supporting student activism, what is your thought about a student movement sustaining itself and growing beyond demands that have to do with the life of a student and education, but addressing these larger, inevitable, larger connected issues of democracy and state oppression?
Well, that's kind of what I was saying earlier. I see similarities across the board historically, even before my time, in terms of how organic student movements are and their loyalty to the principles that they are fighting for. All right. So when I saw the news about what just happened in India with the students, it took me right back to the Sharpeville massacre in South Africa. That was a student movement. They were going to force students to learn Afrikaans, and they resisted it. Um, um, Believe it or not, that was actually before my time. That's why I'm saying that even those before us, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in this in the Civil Rights Movement. Um, in each of these movements, ultimately students grow up and they often become the leaders of the movements overall. So it's, student movements have always been the best development, the best incubator, precisely because youth gives you an opportunity to see what freedom means and what liberation means in its purest form. Um, that's why even though I'm not a student anymore, well, technically I am now because I'm working on a doctorate, but I'm not a young student. And so I'm always there when the student movement calls. Just anecdotally, a few years ago, there was some black student athletes at Georgetown during COVID, and it was a burgeoning movement. And some of the Georgetown administration, the thing about being a student leader, eventually, um, a younger generation of leaders of a university will catch up with you. So I'm no longer the infamous person I was when I was a student. Georgetown is relieved it was no longer attached to apartheid. So they invited me to speak to this group of students for Black History Month, and I went on to give a Black History Month presentation. And when I got on there, they said, "That's not really what we want to hear from you." I was like, well, "What is this? We want you to show us how you shut down the school in 1985 because we want to learn how to do it." And I said, I chastised the administration. I said, "Did y'all know that's what they wanted? You don't put me on the phone with somebody like that because that's what they're going to ask me, and I'm going to help them." Uh, so um, I'll always support the student movements, and we all should. We were all in our 18, 19s, and 20s at one time, and we know what it's like to stand up to power. And that has a particular influence. Also, let me just say lastly, even those who weren't students per se were young. Dr. King was only 25 years old when he led the Montgomery bus boycott. Malcolm X was only 23 when he led his first mosque. So, youth is everything. And those of us who don't necessarily aren't necessarily youth chronologically, we should figure out ways to stay young at heart so that we can stand with students and student movements.
Thank you. Thank you. You had mentioned about earlier, you had mentioned about the weaponization by people who are full-on anti-Semitic of this word anti-Semitic. And we in the Hindu community that are those of us who are progressive and Hindus of conscience that are fighting Hindutva, we are very, very familiar with this. We are called anti-Hindu. We are called Hindu-phobic. We are called anti-India. So this is something that is very familiar to us. I wondered if Rabbi Margot, we're doing that work from a political activist stand, and our new project Samadarshini will help us deepen our work to bring Hindu religious teachings and traditions into our fight, to undergird that fight, because we believe that we could stand up on a mountain and say we are for human rights from now till the end of time, but that movement of Hindus fighting caste and fighting Hindu nationalism needs to be undergirded by Hindu religious teachings for it to really last through generations and have impact. And we're engaged in that work. I wondered if Rabbi Margot, you could talk about the work that Rabbis for Ceasefire, but also other groups you're involved in, and you yourself as a rabbi are doing to deflect these accusations of, self-hating Jew, anti-Semitism, et cetera, when you are doing God's work on earth by, opposing war and genocide.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think being like the whole notion of a ritual action, like really like bringing our liturgy, bringing our texts, bringing the core, and naming the like central values of Judaism as part of um, the the as part of like integrating that into the protest. The first action that we did after October 7th was in front of the Capitol in DC, and it was a prayer service. Um, and that is to say, like, we're not going to engage we're not going to try to defend how we understand ourselves to be Jewish. We're going to show it. We're going to say, like, this is like, we're here, we're using our tradition, and we're praying with these words in service of this cause. And to it's more just like, this is what our tradition fuels, um, what we're doing. The idea of pikuach nefesh, the most sacred obligation in Jewish tradition, is the saving of a life, um, is valuing of life. The idea of B'Tselem Elohim, like all life is sacred. We're created in the divine image. Every living being has a spark of the divine, and living that in our actions and in what we do. I like, and not trying to be defensive and engage in that.
Thank you. I think that's our MO at Hindus for Human Rights as well. There's no need to answer such questions, and just by being inclusive and insisting on not being divided from our fellow humans who might be of the same religion, might be of other religions, and of course in the Hindu and Indian tradition, we also have the issue of caste dividing us and chopping us into pieces, but just insisting that our way forward as Hindus of conscience is together with all of humanity. That's the way that we roll, and it's. I must say, both of you and the movements and communities that you represent are, you're the the North Star for us, because we, as Hindus for Human Rights, we don't have many role models. There are role models during pre-Indian independence. There are so many people of all the faiths in South Asia, including Hinduism, who were from their position of faith resisting colonialism and every kind of injustice. But since Indian independence, there are very few role models for us to hitch our wagon to and look up to. And as we build our own movements of resistance, we look up to both of you and everyone who stands with you. And I'm just, on behalf of the organization, so grateful. I want to move to Reverend Mark. Reverend Mark, you are the main organizer for the Selma Bridge Crossing Jubilee. And I've come a number of times with my colleagues to Selma and Montgomery and walked with you across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. That is a place that is soaked in the blood of foot soldiers. And as a Hindu, when I go there with you, I experience it as a pavitra sthal, a sacred place made holy by moral sacrifice. And I consider that journey a sacrifice. I consider the journey a pilgrimage. Reverend Mark, tell me what that space, that sacred space, means to you, and tell us the story of how you came to be so integrally involved in the Jubilee and the movement.
Well, I think the Edmund Pettus Bridge represents a place of martyrdom, um, redemptive suffering. And we often, at many points in history, we see individual acts of martyrdom. But it's incredible to see a collective of people risk their lives, just like the students did in India the other day, just like the Sharpeville massacre in South Africa. It's even more meaningful when a collective comes together and said, we're going to all put our lives on the line for what's right. That to me is a great example of faith, because I don't think any of the gods that we serve, by whatever name we call each god within our faith, is seeking to save one person. This is just the faith. Hinduism is only for Sunita. Judaism is only for Margot. I think that's the example. When a collective is touched to do something so significant as that, that shows how God is working. How can all those people come together and decide to risk their lives and be of the same mind if there isn't something bigger than them, larger than them, guiding them? From an African American perspective, theologically and culturally, the Edmund Pettus Bridge is a sacred pilgrimage, much like when Muslims go to Mecca. Our lives and our movement here was pretty much defined by Selma, because it led to the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which the Calais Supreme Court case just gutted. But that was the crown jewel of the civil rights movement. Prior to the Voting Rights Act of 1965, there was no democracy. All right. So if we want to talk about bicentennials and 250 years and the birthplace of America, this place that's supposed to be about democracy actually didn't begin democracy until 1965. That's the date. That's the beginning of America. We can say 1619 Project, which is true in terms of when enslaved people came. But in terms of this so-called experiment of democracy, that did not begin until 1965. And to note, it wasn't just for African Americans. There's this footnote in all the constitutional amendments where where it says this amendment may be enforced by congressional action. I'm paraphrasing. And in the case even of the 19th Amendment and women getting the right to vote, that was not fully enforced until the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And now all that's been gutted. We even see with women, depending upon if you change your name in marriage, it's like in the old days, they can determine whether you're on the voting rolls or not. So if we have no democracy, that's really what America is supposed to offer. And in a moment of low wages and capitalism and poverty and so many other problems, democracy is about all you got left here. And if you gut that, what do we have? We may have the temporary illusion that we aren't persecuted for freedom of speech as we are in other countries, and just like the students in India. We think we're not persecuted, but in many ways we are. We can go back and look at what happened to Colombia. So that's what drew me to Selma. It also just so happens I have a paternal ancestor, a great great grandmother, who was born in Selma in the 1850s. Don't know a lot about her. I just do know that. So my family's bloodline is in Selma. And I decided long ago, as a minister, as a theologian, as a person of faith, that that would be a place. And I've been proven right, because, as with you, I invite people casually to come to Selma, see what's like. Everybody I have ever invited to Selma, every organization, no matter what faith, no matter what color or class, they come one time and then they don't stop coming, because it's just that meaningful, obviously, for others as well. There's something about that experience. And now it's even more sacred, because people don't take away rights from you that don't matter and that are inconsequential. And so what we want as Selma is gone. Selma also established the rights for those with disabilities to have access to the polls, which they didn't have before. And so all of that has been taken away. Much of it is on the chopping block. And so Selma to me is even more sacred now than it ever was before. Lastly, you know, all of our faiths have experienced some degree of oppression in the world and in this country. And Selma was one of the last frontiers where we had multiple faiths together. Famously, Rabbi Heschel marched with Dr. King, called everybody to Selma. That's how big it was. Everybody came to Selma. And then others, between Bloody Sunday and the final march from Selma to Montgomery 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, 2 weeks later, there were members of the clergy who were killed, who were martyred in Selma. Reverend James Reeb, for example, because they were standing up for the right to vote. And so it is sacred space. It will always be sacred to me. And I hope people would consider it even more sacred now that Trump and the Supreme Court want to roll things back.
I'm going to ask you both one last question and then invite our audience to engage with both of you. Thinking about Edmund Pettus Bridge and my repeated visits to Selma, and also thinking about the fact that Rabbi Heschel was right there on that bridge with Martin Luther King. I guess my question for Rabbi Margot is, it was in New York City 1 year, I believe to the day, that Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated, that he stood in Riverside Church and gave a sermon called Beyond Vietnam. And he earned the ire of not just, the community, the country at large and the major newspapers, but even of people and leaders in the African American community, for connecting civil rights to atrocities of this country abroad. And he stood there and he gave this searing sermon. I believe Rabbi Heschel was right by his side as he spoke those words. My question, Rabbi Margot, is particular, but hopefully you can also expand on it. Both of those great men who we look up to, Rabbi Heschel and Dr. King, they were vociferous in their opposition to the Vietnam War. But while others of their generation, including Malcolm X and so many others, stood against already at that time Israel's atrocities towards Palestinian people. Those two men were not saying so much about it at all. Where does that take you? And how do you sort of wrap your head around that? And how does a fact like that connect to your role today in this movement for justice, which I know, knowing you, that is justice for all of us?
It's a very like timely question in terms of thinking about how, as rabbis for ceasefire, in the immediate days after October 7th, there were 80 rabbis who um, signed on to our statement, and now we have, I think, over 430. There are people who have come on board who weren't where we were from the outset, who have come on board, and there's been a lot of like internal tensions and stuff around that, with some people feeling like if you weren't there from the beginning, don't like you didn't like you're not welcome with us, and some people feeling like we have to act with a sense of a generosity of spirit, in that people are on their own journeys, and we need to bring people in um, as they come to either see the truth, or because it's not just them feeling it, it's that a lot of people are so scared that people might agree but are scared to actually speak out because it threatens I've known people to lose their jobs. And so I think and I think, where what we've really tried to cultivate doing in Rabbis for Ceasefire is, bringing people in and understanding that people are in their own process for a lot of different reasons. And we can't, um, we can't judge them for not speaking up earlier if they're willing to speak up now.
Yeah. Thank you. And Reverend Mark, an incredible person that I have met on each of my trips to Selma and Montgomery is, I'm sure, somebody you know very well, Frank Hardy. He's an artist. He was 11 years old on Bloody Sunday, and he was with a group of little kids, and they heard some commotion, and they ran in the direction of the noise. And I think they were handing out some flyers, some pamphlets, and they were running towards the bridge, and they never made it onto the bridge because what they saw was the crowd of people, their own community on the bridge was running towards them off the bridge, bloody, dripping, including little kids, bloody and dripping, and running off the bridge with a big plume of smoke behind them. And the reason I'm describing this image like this is because Frank has painted it over and over again, what he saw that day. And he's such an incredible person. He doesn't call himself a foot soldier because he didn't make it onto the bridge that day. So Frank has come up with this, and he's from the community. He's from that soil, from that hallowed ground. And he's come up with a project, which I hope one day in his life will, come to big, beautiful fruition. It's called the Defiant Run. And he envisions each of us Velcroing our wrist together with somebody from a different race, a different religion, just different to us in a very fundamental way. And you Velcro yourself together at the wrist and you run an obstacle course. And in his big vision, you train for months for that obstacle course, and then you run the course. And it's just so moving to me when I come to Selma and when I come into my own community, when it is addressing its challenges. We are so often focused on our own challenges, but here is a man who is saying that the way forward, even when you're addressing the challenges of your own people, and the challenges broader than that in the world, is to hook yourself to somebody who is different to you. It's pluralism. That is the way forward. And he speaks about it so powerfully. When I come to Selma, I often find the conversation during the weekend about the history, the leaders that are passing away because they're getting old. And sometimes there will be some current events like the gutting of the Voting Rights Act currently will be talked about. I don't often see a connection made to immigrant rights in this country, and certainly nothing foreign policy related. What can we do to make our movements, all of our movements for justice, are so interconnected and intertwined? What can we do to do a better job of getting all of our communities to link up movements with each other in this country and then also around the world?
Well, first of all, you mentioned something earlier. I just wanted to lift up. Rabbi Heschel was, in fact, at Riverside with Dr. King April 4th, 1967. In fact, Dr. King acknowledges him in the speech. And then March 25th, 1968, just 10 days before Dr. King was martyred, Rabbi Heschel introduced Dr. King at the Jewish Theological Seminary's Rabbinical Council. So he was there just 10 days before he was killed in Memphis. I, the thing about Selma, though, is because it is an issue of democracy, and because, let's face it, the way things work in this country politically, we need people to vote to affect foreign policy, immigrant rights, Supreme Court appointments, etc. There's no reason why Selma does not and should not encompass all those issues. And we've had all of those issues presented over the years as they have come up. But it's been hard. It's just really been in the past few years. And I think we can go back to 2016 when there was really a very real acknowledgement on the part of our movement that the Supreme Court is very consequential. A lot of times for years, people voted in this country and didn't vote on the basis of whom a president might appoint to the Supreme Court. Hillary Clinton brought that up, and a lot of people, unfortunately, didn't get that message, including just about 50% of women voters. And now Roe is gone. So I always, if we're talking about being ecumenical, that's not just in terms of our faith stories or our liturgies or our scriptures. We got to be ecumenical also in terms of our issues. And so we've got to see all of these things working together. We've got to be sensitive to one another. And lastly, folks, it makes all the difference in the world when those of us who don't come from a certain experience still stand with those in their own experience. Women are expected to stand up for women. But when a man says, I'm going to stand up for feminism and womanism, that means something. When a citizen stands up for immigrants, immigrants are expected to stand up for immigrants. When a wealthy person stands up for who's poor, when someone straight stands up for someone LGBT, when someone white stands up for someone who's black, when someone Muslim stands up for someone who's Jewish, and when someone Jewish stands up for somebody who's Muslim. That's what makes all the difference in the world, because people can say, wait a minute, it's not just about what's happening to the students in India, we expect Sunita to say that. But when Mark and Margot say it, wait a minute, we got to take a look because they're not even from there. They're not even Hindu. And so I think that's what we really need when we go to Selma. Yes, we need to help people understand how this affects everything, all of those issues you raise. And even when we're not in Selma, we should call upon one another to stand for the issues that folks normally expect us to stand for as well.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. I know that we've had this conversation, and I think that the folks with us on Zoom are burning to ask their questions. So I'll ask Mayank to take it from here. Thank you both so much.
Hello. We have one question so far. Those of you in the audience, please feel free to put your questions in the chat box and we'll go through them. But one question, I think it's directed to all three of you, can answer anyway. But why, when sites of protest are sanctified by the moral courage shown there, it is so difficult for people to get that and see that their religious values are only upheld and not quote unquote threatened? Instead, they cling to their religion as if it requires them to oppose the cause on principle. Like, even now, I hear elders saying that the youth protests in India were anti-Hindu. They will not even oppose the fact that the police destroyed a library at the protest site, which is actually anti-Hindu.
Well, I'll take a crack at that. I think one of the challenges we face generationally, I was just talking to someone about this the other day, is the way in which we communicate with each other generationally, or should I say there's a lack of communication. And that's just not what's going on with the students in India. I mean, we see that in this country. I'm sure Margot would agree. And God bless her. I don't envy her because I was involved in the background and sat in on some of the conversations and dialogue between different generations of the Jewish faith, trying to reconcile. It's very complicated. And so generationally, there's a challenge. Young people mobilize themselves and communicate more electronically and on social media, while at the same time, social media is sending messages through algorithms for the purpose of dividing us generationally, right? So I have no doubt that some of the elders who don't understand what the students did in India were themselves radicalized against the youth by what they see on social media and vice versa. And so every opportunity we can have to Sunita to have intergenerational dialogue, let's flush some of these things out. It's better when we talk to each other than exclusively through social media. That I'm just going to be clear. Meta, X, their agenda is not to bring us together. It's to further divide and conquer and confuse us. So I think that's part of the battle. And lastly, what we want to keep in mind when we rely on these devices, again, if we're talking about struggle worldwide, know that these very devices we use, unfortunately, even the ones we're using right now, are powered by a battery with minerals from the Congo, where people are dying every day. So not only are we being misinformed and divided by the algorithms, people are dying as a result of it every day. So we got to have a holistic look at all of this. And I know that sounds overwhelming, but our ancestors and those who fought were also in overwhelming situations, and they still won. Gandhi was not supposed to defeat Britain. That you can't do. You're not supposed to do that. What are you talking about? You're not just going to be some regular dude shutting down India and taking over and getting rid of the colonial power. That's not supposed to happen. And then that's not supposed to be handed to a group of preachers in the South to overthrow segregation. That was not in the plan. So knowing what they did, right? Knowing what they overcame, ought to be a lesson to us that, as overwhelming as it might seem, we can overcome some of these obstacles today.
Rabbi Margot?
I I can't agree with you more, Reverend Mark. Um, and I would add, like, there, those platforms, not it, in addition to dividing, conquering, and confusing, um, they're there to buy our to get our attention. And what gets attention is anything in the more extreme, and the more extreme, the more we're divided, the things that that draw us, that pop out. And that's not about nuance, that's not about holding paradox. It's not about actually interacting and learning from each other. And that's something, in communities that I'm part of, like, really trying to bring people together in person and figuring out how to structure conversations across difference intergenerationally, and realizing that we may like all of the um, language and catchphrases get in the way. Are we saying genocide? Are we not saying genocide? Are we um, whatever the hot term is, like, in that moment? If we strip it down to what are our values here, what are the values in which we're operating on, and what are we then doing with those values, we realize that we've got more in common than we have like different from one another.
Yes, and I would add that just being glued to the live streams coming out of the protests in India, I saw right on their stage the Constitution and the Ramcharitmanas, which is so dear to Hindus. And there was expression of faith throughout the protesters. And I was particularly struck by one video of a Muslim young man dancing away to a Hindu bhajan. I think that if anyone is saying to any of us that the protest that just happened in India in any way didn't respect all the religions, including the Hindu religion, we can just show them those videos and photographs that prove otherwise. And then earlier, when Margot, you were talking about the Yom Kippur protest and how there were people whose job it was to keep the rabbis safe as they were prostrating and doing the rituals. I also remember on Columbia campus, we all stood around the Muslim students as they prayed, everybody who was there. And so, when people accused those initiatives and actions of being against whatever religion they chose that particular day, we can just show that this is it's what we said before about the accusations of anti-Semitism and Hinduphobia. We can just show and demonstrate without even any effort, because it is who we are. Just show what we do, because it is inclusive and it does respect not just our own faiths, but all faiths. But thank you. We can go on, Mayank.
Yeah, we have one last question from Raman, who says, for Rabbi Margot and Reverend Mark, are there parts of the Bible which lend itself to political Zionism or any other injustice which you have had to let go in order to challenge these injustices, problematic beliefs, etc.? And how did you deal with, if you had to, with people saying that you're undermining or hollowing out the religion? I ask because many Hindu texts, if not all, assume or justify caste. Sunita, also welcome to chime in.
I can take that one first. Um, yeah. I mean, I think there are the there's so much in the tradition that, you know, I don't ascribe to. I've had to either let go of, or really like I don't know if it's let go of. It's as much as it is of like holding with tension, or um, reimagining, and reinfusing with meaning. And I think fundamentally, the the Jewish law, the word for Jewish law is halakha, which literally means um, like walking or going. It's a journey, a process. And there are some um, denominations of Judaism that say that process stopped with the ancient rabbis, and it's sort of frozen. So what halakha is more fixed with a certain group of people. But Judaism has always been an evolving tradition. And um, if you are learned and in, constant relationship with it and with the texts, I believe that we all have the power um, to move the journey, to be on this journey and evolve the tradition. That's part of what it means. And so for the things, there are ways that I've learned to understand things differently. There is not, as much as it talks about land in and land being designated for us in the Torah, um, that is different than a nation, like an ethno nation state as we understand it currently. And the thing is that we never get to the promised land in the Torah. Like the point is, like, we are like part of manifesting what it means to be in the promised land. The point is the journey, is the evolution, is the process, not some fixed piece of actual land. And that's one way that I relate to, um, the notion, like, there isn't Zionism isn't in that word isn't in the Torah. Like, there's, that's a modern concept. And there are so many meanings of what that is. There's spiritual Zionism, there's political Zionism, there's and I don't think, you know, and those things are not codified in our sacred texts.
Um, when I was ordained in the Baptist tradition, it's like a trial, and a bunch of ministers line up and ask you questions about Scripture. And I was asked, I was kind of put on the spot by an old, fine brimstone Jamaican preacher. And he said, Reverend Mark, do you believe in, will you endorse the infallibility of Scripture? And I know Margot knows, and Sunina, some folk, you talked about those elders earlier, some folk, word for word, verbatim. And he put me on the spot. And my response to him, because people saw a conflict brewing, but I responded to him in a way that let the moderator move us along. And I said, it is never, and this goes, I think, for all of us, it is never about the infallibility of Scripture. It is about the fallibility of humankind's interpretation of Scripture. And there's not a Scripture that has not been reinterpreted more than once, many times over generations. And so I think that's the challenge before us. Sometimes in the Black Baptist and Christian tradition, we talk about struggling with the text. And I think that's part of our struggle as well, not just our struggle with powers and principalities and rulers of darkness, but also with how scripture is interpreted and how it is applicable to today's times. And I think some of us also have to have the courage to say, um, some scriptures, when they were written and or interpreted, are now obsolete. I mean, if we literally took everything literally, just give you an example. It says in the Hebrew text, it says in the Old Testament, thou shalt not handle the carcass of a swine. So we'd have to stop watching the NFL, right? So we have these examples, and I don't think we should be imprisoned by them. I think we have to take what's useful now, especially in this moment, and use it in the employ of rescuing and saving God's people from the three evils Dr. King laid out with Rabbi Heschel by his side: poverty, racism slash any discrimination, and militarism. And if our scriptures, our interpretation of scriptures aren't doing those things, then what are we doing at all?
I'll just say that Hindus for Human Rights is exactly that endeavor. We are all here, and these liberation baithaks are conversations that are, at least they aspire to bring us closer and closer to the question, how do we move forward as Hindus that don't believe in caste and want to reject it entirely and move forward hand in hand with the rest of humanity? That is what we are here to do. And so whoever asked the question, you're part of the answer as far as the Hindu community is concerned.